Della Rourke did not cry when Harlan Voss slid the paper across his desk and told her she had 7 days. She read it once, top to bottom, the way she read a seed catalog or a doctor's bill, slow and with her whole face still. There were $42 in the coffee tin at home and 160 acres under her name, and Harlan Voss, president of the Cattlemen's and Merchants Bank of Renwick, wanted them both. "Sell, or we foreclose," he said, and folded his soft hands. "You've no bank left in the world, Della Rourke. Sell to me now, or lose it for nothing in the spring." His clerk was in the doorway. The clerk heard it. So did the man from the land company, waiting in the outer room with his hat on his knee. Della set the paper down on the edge of the desk, square to the corner, and said only that she would want the exact figure, in writing, and the exact day. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Wherever you're listening from tonight, a porch, a truck cab, a kitchen with the radio low, stay to the end. This one is worth it. Now, let it start where it truly starts. The Rourke place sat 2 miles west of Renwick, where the road quit being gravel and became 2 ruts and a memory of gravel. It was a quarter section, 160 acres, and it had been a Rourke since 1889, when Thomas's grandfather walked behind a team and broke the first furrow into ground that had never held anything but grass and the wind that combed it. The house was small and square and honest. The barn leaned a little to the south, the way a man leans into a hard job. There was a windmill that sang when the blades caught, and a cottonwood by the stock tank that Thomas had climbed as a boy and their son Emmett climbed now, and a low place near the creek where in a wet year the corn stood taller than a tall man. It had not been a wet year. It had not been a wet year in 4. Della had come to the place as a bride at 19, in a wagon, with a cedar chest and a Bible and a way of standing that told Thomas Rourke she was not afraid of him or of anything he owned. She was 41 now. Her hands had the look of hands that had wrung out wash in January and pulled calves in March and buried a husband in the frozen ground of February 2 winters back, when the pneumonia took him in 9 days flat and left her with 2 children, a mortgage, and a piece of earth that she loved past all reason. They had told her, after the funeral, that she ought to sell. The women told her gently, over pie. The men told her plainly, in the yard. A widow could not work a quarter section. A widow with a boy of 14 and a girl of 9 had no business behind a plow. Della had thanked them for coming and let them drive off down the ruts, and then she had walked out to the west field in her good black dress and stood a long while looking at the ground Thomas was already part of, and she had made him a promise there that she never spoke aloud to a living soul. She kept it too. She and Emmett worked the place. June, 11 now, gathered eggs and hoed the garden and could set a table for threshers. They ran short. They ran shorter. But the wheat came in each July, and the corn came in each fall, and they had held. Holding cost more than anyone driving past on the road would ever guess. Della had sold her mother's good dishes to a woman in Kearsley for $11 and told June they'd only been chipped. She had turned Thomas's Sunday suit into a coat for Emmett with her own needle and let out the hems of June's 2 dresses twice and darned the same 3 pairs of stockings until they were more darn than stocking. She fixed the tractor herself now, lying under it in the dust with a wrench and Thomas's memory, because there was no money for the man in town who mended tractors. When the well pump froze in January, she thawed it with kettles at 4 in the morning so the stock could drink. And she did not wake the children, because a mother's whole religion is letting the young sleep through the worst of it. None of this was a story she told. It was simply the price, paid daily, in the plain coin of a plain life, for the right to stand on 160 acres and call them hers. That was the debt Harlan Voss could not see on his ledger and would never think to add up. To him the Rourke place was a number and a nuisance. To Della it was every hard winter she had outlasted and every grave on the little rise beyond the windbreak. The difference between those 2 ways of seeing the same ground was the whole of what was about to happen in Sable County. The thing they had not held against was the note. Thomas had taken it in 29, a fair year, the last fair year, to buy a used tractor and a two-bottom plow and a little breathing room. $1,400 at a decent rate from the Cattlemen's and Merchants Bank, back when the Cattlemen's and Merchants Bank still lent to a man on a handshake in the weight of his name. Then the market fell out of the world. Wheat that had been $1.10 went to 38 cents, then to a quarter, then some days to nothing worth hauling. The bank that had been friendly turned careful, and then it turned hungry, and somewhere in there old Mr. Cattermole died, and his nephew Harlan Voss came out from Omaha to run things, and the note was renewed and renewed again. Each time on worse terms, until the $1,400 had become, with interest folded on interest, with a renewal fee here and a penalty there, a debt of $2,840 against a farm that Voss now swore, in that same soft voice, was worth barely more. $2,840. 7 days. Della understood arithmetic. She had done the families for 22 years. There was no arithmetic in the county that made $42 into $2,840 in a week. That was the point. Voss knew there wasn't. He had a system, Harlan Voss. Della had watched it work on other people for 2 years and had been careful, until now, to keep her own head down and her payments as near current as a dying market allowed. The system was this: when a farmer fell behind, Voss did not help him catch up. He waited. He let the interest do its patient work. And when the debt had swollen large enough that no honest year could pay it, he called the note in full, gave the family a week or two of impossible time, and then, regretfully, always regretfully, a Christian man doing a hard duty, he foreclosed. The bank took the farm. And then, in a way nobody could quite prove but everybody could plainly see, the farm did not stay with the bank. It went, at a courthouse step auction where nobody outbid the bank, to a thing called the Sable Land and Cattle Company, whose office was a brass plate on a door in Omaha, and whose man in Renwick was a smiling fellow named Calvin Pell. Calvin Pell was the man who had been sitting in Voss's outer room with his hat on his knee. The Sable Land and Cattle Company did not want to farm. It wanted to own. It was buying up the county quarter by foreclosed quarter, the way a boy sweeps marbles into his pocket, betting that the drought would break and the prices would rise and a man who owned half of Sable County outright would be a rich man when the sun came out again. The farmers who had broken that ground and buried their people in it were, to the Sable Land and Cattle Company, simply the previous owners. Della had known the Tandys. She had known the Lindfists. She had stood at the back of the crowd on the courthouse steps in June when the Tandy place went under the auctioneer's hammer for a price that wouldn't cover a good funeral, and she had watched Otto Tandy stand there holding his hat and his composure while a lifetime got called out in a sing-song voice. The North 80, the improvements, the barn, the well, and knocked down for less than Otto had once paid for his team of mules. The whole town had come, the way a town comes to a hanging, half of them ashamed to be there and none of them able to stay away. Nobody bid against the bank. Nobody ever did. When it was over and the paper was signed, somebody in the crowd had asked Harlan Voss, quiet, but not quiet enough, whether he didn't feel a thing at all taking a man's home over the heads of his neighbors, and Voss had looked out over that crowd with his soft, regretful, satisfied face and said, loud enough for the front rows to carry it back, sentiment doesn't pay a note. Friend, the land goes to whoever can hold it. That's not cruelty. That's just the arithmetic of hard times. And he had folded his hands. Della had watched Otto Tandy hear that, and she had watched something go out of the man's back that never fully came into it again. And she had felt something turn over in her own chest that was not grief and was not fear. She had not had a name for it then. She had one now. She had gone in to see Voss on the Tuesday, in her good dress, to ask for what the Tandys had not gotten. A little more time. The corn was 2 weeks from harvest. If she could bring it in and haul it and get even the poor price it would bring, she could make the fall payment and show good faith and buy herself a winter to figure the rest. It was a reasonable thing to ask. Thomas would have asked it man to man, and old Cattermole would have granted it and poured him a coffee. Voss listened to her with his head tipped and a small patient smile, the way a man listens to a child explain why she oughtn't be punished. When she finished, he let a silence sit, to teach her the silence, and then he said the figure and the 7 days, and then he said the thing about her having no bank left in the world, and then, because a man like Harlan Voss cannot resist the last quarter turn of the screw, he said one thing more. "It's nothing personal, Mrs. Rourke," he said. "It's the market. A widow with a plow and 2 children to feed can't hold a place this size. And everyone in this county knows it but you. Sell it to me clean, and I'll see you get moving money. Fight me and the sheriff takes it in the spring, and you get nothing. There's no help coming, Della. There's no money left in this county." He spread his soft hands, palms up, a man showing he held no cards because he held all of them. "There's only me." The clerk in the doorway looked at his shoes. Out in the front room, Calvin Pell smiled at the ceiling. Della stood. She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, once, the way she did before she walked into church. She was not a large woman, and Voss did not rise, so she looked down at him across the desk, and when she spoke her voice was as level as a tabletop. "You'd best draw those papers careful, Mr. Voss," she said. "Every line of them. Because I mean to read every line of everything from here on out. Yours, and the county's, and the government's too. The law's been changing for people like me. You may not have read that part yet." She picked up the folded notice off the corner of the desk. "I'll want that figure in writing. And the day. Good afternoon." She walked out through the front room past Calvin Pell, who tipped his hat to her and said, "Ma'am," in a friendly way, and she did not answer him, and she went down the bank's front steps into the hard, bright light of a dry October, and she did not let her back bend until she was 3 blocks gone and around the corner of the feed store, where nobody could see her put one hand flat against the boards and breathe. The law's been changing for people like me. She had said it. She half believed it. She had heard the words at the elevator, and again from the mailman, and once on the radio through the static, words like farm credit and land bank and the government's refinancing farms now. The way you hear that it's raining 40 miles off, which does you no good at all where you're standing in the dust. She did not know if the words meant anything real. She did not know where to put her hand on them. But she had said it to his face. And Harlan Voss, for just 1/2 of 1 second, before the patient smile came back down over it, Harlan Voss had blinked. She held on to that. All the way home in the Ford truck with the bad second gear, bouncing over the ruts with the notice on the seat beside her. She held on to that one blink like a coal she meant to carry a long way. She did not tell the children the whole of it. She told Emmett the shape of it. Because he was 16 and had a man's share of the work and had earned a man's share of the truth. She told him at the barn, in the lantern light, while he forked hay to the 2 horses and the milk cow. And she watched his young jaw set hard and his hands go still on the fork handle. "He can't just take it," Emmett said. "Pa built half that barn. Grandpa broke the ground. He can't just take it." "He can," Della said. "That's the trouble with a note, son. It's a rope you tie around your own place, thinking you'll only ever pull it tight yourself." She took the fork from him and hung it on its nail. "But a rope has 2 ends. I aim to find the other one." That night, after the children slept, she sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low to save the kerosene, and she got out the tin box where Thomas had kept the papers. She had not opened it since the winter he died. There was the deed, the quarter section. In her name now, free of everything but the one note. There was the note itself, and its renewals, each on the bank's cream paper with Voss's careful signature. There was the marriage license and the children's birth papers, and a lock of hair from a baby that had come too early in 1921 and not stayed. There was Thomas's discharge paper from the Great War, from 1918, with an eagle stamped at the top and his name written in a clerk's fine hand, Rourke, Thomas E., private, honorably discharged. Della sat a long time with that one in her hand. Then she put the papers back in order, all but the deed and the note, which she kept out, and she took a clean sheet from June's school tablet, and she wrote at the top, in her steady schoolteacher neat hand, the words, "What is true? And where to find it?" And under that she began to make a list of every place she had ever heard the words land bank spoken, and every person who might know one true thing more than she did. The county agent. The mailman. Otto Tandy, who'd lost his and might at least know which doors were locked. The courthouse, 40 minutes away in the county seat at Kearsley. The newspaper. The radio. It was not much of a list. But Della Rourke had started smaller things than this with less. She turned down the lamp until the flame was a bead, and she went to bed, and she lay in the dark listening to the windmill turn and the dry windwork at the house. And she thought, 7 days. And then she thought, the way she'd taught herself to think in the 2 years since February. All right. What can be done by morning? She did not sleep much, and it was well she didn't, because Harlan Voss's arrogance had already run ahead of his paperwork. She was at the stove before dawn, building up the fire, when Emmett came through the door without his coat, breathing hard, the way a boy breathes when he has run from the far fence. "Ma," he said. "There's men in the West Field. 2 of them. And a car." Della set down the poker. She took the deed out of the tin box, she had left it out on the shelf, and later she would think how right her hands had been to do that, and she folded it into her apron pocket, and she walked out across the yard, and through the gap in the windbreak, into the gray morning, with Emmett a step behind her, and June watching from the porch in her nightgown. There were 2 men in the West Field, where the corn stood 2 weeks from harvest, and there was a black car pulled right up onto the turn row with its wheels in the dry dirt. One man was a stranger in a stiff collar, with a surveyor's tripod and a chain, sighting through his instrument at a pole the other man held. And the other man, holding the pole, in a good gray hat and a friendly smile, was Calvin Pell. At their feet, driven into the ground at the edge of Thomas Rourke's corn, was a little wooden stake with a strip of red cloth tied to its top, and the red cloth moved in the dawn wind like something alive. "Morning, Mrs. Rourke," Calvin Pell called out, pleasant as a neighbor. "Didn't mean to wake the house. We're just having a look at the ground. No harm in it. You go on back in out of the cold." Della walked up to the little red flag and stood over it. She did not raise her voice. She had never in her life needed to raise her voice, and she did not learn how that morning. "Mr. Pell," she said, "who told you could stand in my corn?" Calvin Pell's smile did not slip, but it changed a little, the way a smile changes when a man decides to be patient with a woman. "Well now," he said, "there's a note on this place, ma'am, and that note's coming due, and the Sable Land and Cattle Company likes to know what it's looking at before a thing goes to sale. It's just business." "Mr. Voss said." "Mr. Voss doesn't own this ground," Della said. "The bank doesn't own this ground, not today, and if I have my way, not any day." She took the deed out of her apron pocket and held it up, folded, not to be read but to be seen, the way you'd show a dog a stick. "My name's the only name on this, and you're standing on it without leave, the both of you, and there's a witness to it." She did not look back at Emmett, but she felt him straighten. "So you'll pull your tripod and your chain and your automobile off my turn row, and you'll do it now, and you can tell Harlan Voss that Della Rourke sent you off her land with the sun not even up. He'll want that written down for his files. I know I'll want it for mine." The surveyor was already folding his tripod, being a man paid by the day and not by the argument. But Calvin Pell held his ground one moment longer, because a man like Calvin Pell cannot go without the last friendly word. "You're making this awful hard on yourself, Della," he said. "Gentle, sorry, false. A place like this, a widow can't." Della reached down and pulled the little red flag out of her ground. It came up easy. It had only been set to look at, not to hold. She wound the red cloth once around the stake and put it in her apron pocket beside the deed, and she looked Calvin Pell full in the face. "That's twice now a man's told me what a widow can't," she said. "I've started keeping count. Good morning." Mr. Pell and Calvin Pell, who had come to measure a thing he thought was already his, tipped his good gray hat and got in his black car and drove it back over the ruts toward Rennick, with the surveyor's chain rattling in the back seat. And Della Rourke stood in the west field with her son beside her and her husband's ground under her feet, and the sun just then breaking red over the far shelter belt, and she watched them go until they were only dust. Then she went in and finished cooking breakfast, because the children had to eat and because a heart that has just decided something needs to keep the hands busy while it hardens. The little red flag stayed in her apron pocket. She meant to keep it. She had a growing sense that before this was over there would be a use for a small red flag pulled up out of a field, and she meant to have it ready when the use came round. By morning she had decided the first thing, which was the county agent. His name was Mr. Hollis, and he had an office in the back of the courthouse in Kearsley. A young man from the State Agricultural College with rolled shirt sleeves and a way of talking too fast for farmers. Thomas had thought him a fool with book learning and no dirt under his nails. But Della had noticed that the young man's foolishness ran mostly to being too eager to help, which in October of 1934 struck her as no fool's fault at all. She left Emmett to the corn and took June with her. Because June was quick and would remember things Della might not, and because a girl of 11 at your side softens a man's face when you need it soft. The Ford grumbled the 12 miles to Kearsley in its bad second gear, and the courthouse rose up ahead of them. A square of brick and limestone with a clock in its tower that had been wrong for years and a flag snapping in the dry wind, and on its wide front steps, Della felt it in her stomach. A paper posting board where the foreclosure and auction notices went up, and where, some Saturday soon, the name Rourke would go if she could not stop it. Mr. Hollis was in. He remembered Thomas. He was sorry about Thomas. And when Della sat down across his cluttered desk and laid out the shape of the thing, the note, the figure, the 7 days, Voss and Voss's regretful smile, and the Sable Land and Cattle Company, the young man stopped talking too fast. He got very quiet. Then he got up and shut his office door, which he had not done before, and came back and sat down and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Mrs. Rourke," he said, "how much do you know about the Federal Land Bank?" "I know the 2 words," Della said. "I've been hoping you knew the rest." And so the young man told her, and Della took June's school tablet out of her bag and wrote it all down as he talked, because she did not trust a thing until she had seen it written in her own hand. There was a whole system, he said, that most folks in Sable County either hadn't heard of or hadn't believed. The government had set it up in pieces, some of it years back, in 1916, and a great deal more of it just last year, in 1933, when things got desperate enough that Washington finally moved. It was called the Farm Credit Administration now, and under it sat the Federal Land Bank. And the whole point of it, the whole plain point of it, was this: to refinance farm mortgages. To take a farmer's note away from a bank like the cattlemen's and merchants, pay that bank off in full, and give the farmer instead a new loan from the land bank. A long loan, 30-odd years to pay it back, at a low fixed rate of interest, 4.5%. In small yearly payments a body could actually make. Della's pencil stopped on the paper. "Pay the bank off," she said. "In full. Every dollar," Hollis said. "That's the beauty of it, and it's the part folks don't grasp. The land bank doesn't fight the local bank. It doesn't argue about the debt. It pays it. The whole note, cash on the barrelhead, and takes over the mortgage itself, on kinder terms. Your bank can't say no to being paid in full, Mrs. Rourke. That's not something a banker gets to refuse. If your loan's approved and the money's tendered, Harlan Voss has to take it and mark that note satisfied and release his hold on your deed. And once that note's satisfied, the young man spread his hands, and for the first time there was something almost fierce in his tired young face. "There's nothing left to foreclose." You can't foreclose a debt that's already been paid. June, who had been swinging her feet and studying the moose head on the wall, went still and looked at her mother. Della sat very straight in the hard chair. Outside the window, the wrong clock ticked, and the flag snapped, and somewhere down the hall a typewriter went like a slow rain. She had come 12 miles in a bad truck to find out whether the words she'd thrown in Harlan Voss's face were bluff or were true, and here was a young man in rolled sleeves telling her, quietly, with the door shut, that they were true. She did not let it show. 22 years of not letting things show had made her good at it. But under the table, out of the young man's sight, she pressed June's hand once, hard, and June pressed back, and that was the whole of the celebration she permitted herself. "All right," Della said. "Now tell me the catch." "There's always a catch, Mr. Hollis. Tell me where Harlan Voss is going to be standing when I come around the corner." The young man's face sobered right back down, because of course there was a catch, and it was a serious one, and an honest man does not hide the ditch from someone he's trying to help across the field. The catch was time. The land bank did not hand out money like a peddler. There was an application. There was an appraisal. An appraiser had to come out from the district and walk the ground and set a value, and the loan could only be so large a share of that value. There was a thing called a National Farm Loan Association, a local group the farmers themselves had to belong to, that stood between them and the land bank and shared the risk. If Rennick and Sable County even had such an association. Hollis wasn't sure it was active. If it wasn't, one had to be got going, with members and officers and a charter. All of that took time. Weeks at the least. More likely a couple of months, the way things moved. And Harlan Voss had given her 7 days. "He gave you a week on purpose," Hollis said. "I'd bet my job on it. A banker like that has heard of the land bank same as I have, better than I have. He knows what it can do to his little arrangement. So he's not going to give you the 2 months you'd need. He's going to give you a week you can't use, so that when the week's up he can go to the courthouse and file and post that notice on those front steps and set your auction. All before the government's slow machinery ever gets its first gear turning." The young man rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rourke. I'd be lying if I made it sound easy. You found the right road. But he's already thought about the road, and he's standing on it with a chain across it, and the chain is the calendar." Della looked down at her tablet, at all of it in her own neat hand, pay the bank off in full, satisfied. Nothing left to foreclose. The catch is time. And she was quiet for a moment, and June watched her, and Hollis watched her. "Then I don't need to beat him," Della said at last, slowly, working it out aloud the way she worked out a hard row. "I need to beat his calendar. I need to make the 7 days into 2 months." She looked up. "How does a person do that, Mr. Hollis? How does a person stop a banker's clock without paying him a dime she hasn't got?" And the young man from the agricultural college smiled, a small, dangerous, delighted smile. The smile of a man who has been waiting 2 years for one single farmer to ask exactly the right question. And he got up again and went to a shelf and took down a thin state pamphlet with a green cover, and he laid it on the desk in front of her and turned it so she could read the title, and the title said, "Nebraska Farm Mortgage Moratorium, a Summary for Farmers." "Because you're not the first person Harlan Voss has done this to," Hollis said. "And last year, the legislature noticed. There's a law now. A judge can stop a foreclosure, hold it, freeze it, if a farmer's making a genuine effort to save the place. And Mrs. Rourke," he tapped the green pamphlet once, "there is no genuine effort in this state more genuine than a land bank application already filed." Della Rourke looked at the green pamphlet for a long moment. Then she took June's school tablet and turned to a fresh page. And at the top of it she wrote, in her steady hand, 3 words she underlined twice: "File first. Stall second." She looked at the wrong clock in the courthouse tower through the window. It said 20 past 4, which meant nothing. Her own watch said it was not quite noon, and she had, by Harlan Voss's count, 6 days left. "All right, Mr. Hollis," she said, and closed the tablet, and stood and took her daughter's hand. "You've given me the road and you've shown me the chain. Now show me where a woman signs her name." She signed her name that same afternoon. It was not a grand thing, the signing. It happened at a plank table in the back of the courthouse in Kearsley, on a form with more small print than a body could read in a sitting, and Della Rourke read every line of it anyway, the way she had promised Harlan Voss she would, while Mr. Hollis stood by with his hat in his hands and June counted the tiles on the floor. The form was an application to the Federal Land Bank of Omaha for a farm loan to refinance the mortgage held against her 160 acres by the Cattlemen's and Merchants Bank of Renwick. She filled in the acres. She filled in the crops. She filled in the figure Voss had put on his paper, $2,840, in the box that asked what she owed. And looking at that number sitting inside that box, for the first time, it did not feel like a wall. It felt like a thing that could be paid. There was a catch inside the catch, and Hollis told her that one too, because he was an honest man to the last small print. To borrow from the land bank, she had to belong to a National Farm Loan Association, a local outfit of farmers who each bought a little stock and stood good for one another's loans, the government's way of making neighbors share the risk instead of a distant office carrying it alone. And Sable County's association had gone quiet years back, when times were good and nobody thought they'd ever need it, and the charter had lapsed and the officers had scattered. To use it, she would have to wake it up. She would need 10 farmers at the least, willing to sign on and buy their stock and put their names beside hers. 10 farmers. In a county Harlan Voss had spent 2 years teaching to keep its head down. "I'll get the 10, Della said, and did not know yet how, and signed the application anyway, because you sign first and figure the rest walking home." She dated it. She watched Hollis put it in the district folder and write it in the log. And whatever else came, that was done now, and could not be undone. On the 6th of October, 1934, there was a land bank application on file in the name of Rourke, and the law would care about that date more than it cared about anything Harlan Voss thought he owned. Then she drove home in the bad second gear with her daughter asleep against her arm, and she began, that very night, on the 10. She started with Otto Tandy, because a man who is already lost has nothing left to fear. She found him at his brother's place, where he was living now in a lean-to room and hiring out his own 2 hands on ground that used to be his. And when she told him what she'd found in the back of the courthouse, his face did a slow and painful thing, like a field thawing. "It's too late for me," he said. "They've got mine." And Della said no, it wasn't too late for him to save the next man, and that if he'd put his name to the association and tell every farmer he trusted to do the same, then the thing that took his place might not take theirs. Otto Tandy looked at her a long while. Then he said he'd carry it to every kitchen in the North Township himself, on foot if the truck wouldn't start. And he did. It moved the way things move in a country place, quiet, kitchen to kitchen, over coffee, at the elevator, after church. It moved faster than Della dared hope, and slower than her heart could stand. Some men were afraid. Some men owed Voss and thought he'd hear of it and call their notes for spite. But some men were angry, and had been angry a long time with no place to put it. And to those men, Della's news was like handing a shovel to a man standing in a flood, at last, a thing the hands could do. Within 4 days, she did not have 10 names. She had 31. They met in the Lutheran church hall on a Thursday night with the stove going and the windows fogged, 31 farmers and their wives, and a young county agent talking too fast. And they voted the Sable County National Farm Loan Association back to life, and they elected Otto Tandy secretary because a man who had lost everything would count every dollar twice. And when the meeting was breaking up, an old German named Emil Brauer, who had farmed 60 years and buried 2 sons, came and stood in front of Della and took off his cap and said, in his slow way, "Your man. Thomas. He was over there, in the war. I remember. He come home to this ground. He turned the cap in his big hands. We don't let them take a soldier's ground, missus, not while there is 31 of us. And he put his cap back on and went out into the cold, and Della stood there a moment with her throat tight, because she had come to that hall to ask for help and had been handed, instead, an army. The 7 days ran out on a Tuesday. Harlan Voss did exactly what the young agent had bet his job Voss would do. When the week was up and no deed of sale had come across his desk, he drove to the courthouse in Kearsley in his clean automobile, and he filed his foreclosure, formal and correct, every line of it drawn careful the way she'd told him to draw it. And he arranged for the notice to go up on the wide front steps where the whole county could read it, and he set the sale for the second Saturday in November. Della Rourke, foreclosure and auction of the Northwest Quarter, by order of the Cattlemen's and Merchants' Bank. The clerk who posted it did it with his eyes down. By noon half the county knew, and by supper the other half, and the word that traveled with it was the word Voss had trained them all to expect: another one gone. But Della was already in the courthouse when the notice went up, in a different office, on the other side of the same building, filing a paper of her own. Hollis had drilled her on it for 2 evenings. Nebraska had a law now, passed the year before when the whole state was drowning in foreclosures, a farm mortgage moratorium. It did not forgive a debt. It did not cost the bank $1 it was truly owed. What it did was let a district judge stop a foreclosure in its tracks, hold it, freeze it in place, if the farmer could show he was making a real and honest effort to save the place. And there was no effort in the state of Nebraska more real, Hollis said, than a land bank application already filed, already logged, already dated the 6th of October, 4 days before Voss ever walked in to file his sale. The judge was an old man named Prentice with white eyebrows and a slow way of reading. He read Voss's foreclosure. He read Della's application, stamped and dated. He read the fresh charter of the Sable County National Farm Loan Association with its 31 names. He took off his spectacles and looked down over the bench at the widow standing straight in her good black dress with her son beside her, and at the banker sitting comfortable with his lawyer, and he said that the law was plain. Where a genuine refinancing was underway, the equities favored giving it time to work. He granted a stay. He froze the foreclosure and the November sale for 90 days, or until the land bank ruled on the application, whichever came first. 90 days. Harlan Voss did not blink this time. He had schooled his face since the day in his office, and he kept it flat and pleasant as the judge spoke. But his lawyer leaned and whispered, and Voss's soft hands, folded on the rail in front of him, pressed together just a little harder than folded hands need to press, and Della, who had spent 2 years learning to read the smallest weather in a man's hands, saw it and kept it, and added it to the blink and the red flag in her drawer at home. He caught her on the courthouse steps as she came out, under the very notice, with her own name on it. He was smiling the regretful smile. "You've bought yourself a winter, Mrs. Rourke," he said low, so the loafers on the steps couldn't carry it. "I'll grant you that. It was cleverer than I looked for. But you've bought a winter, not a farm. That government loan of yours turns on an appraisal, a man comes out and says what the ground is worth, and I've been setting the price of dirt in this county for 2 years, and I promise you, in the worst drought since anyone's grandfather, that ground will not appraise for what you owe me. The land bank won't lend a soul more than half of nothing." He touched his hat brim. "You'll be right back on these steps in the spring, and there'll be no clever left in you then. Sell to me now and save yourself the winter of hoping." And that was the moment Della understood how the last of it would go, not on the note which she had beaten, but on the value which he still thought he owned. She looked up at Harlan Voss on the courthouse steps, and she did not argue and she did not gloat. She only said, "You keep telling me what a widow can't, Mr. Voss, that's 4 times now." And she went down the steps to her truck, and she did not let him see that his one true arrow had gone straight into the one place she had no armor. Because he was right about the appraisal. And she knew it. The appraiser came out from the district in the last week of October, a careful man in city shoes with a leather book of figures. And he walked the 160 acres with Della and Emmett beside him, and Della watched him write, and she could read enough of it upside down to feel the ground going cold under her. He saw what a dry October shows. He saw corn short for the season, and a low place by the creek that hadn't stood in water in 4 years, and a pasture chewed to the roots. He was not a cruel man, he was an honest one, and honesty, that fall, in that drought, with wheat at 30-odd cents, did not add up to $2,840. When he closed his book, he was kind about it, which was worse than if he'd been hard, and he said the figures would go to Omaha, and she'd hear, and he drove off in his city shoes. And Della stood in the yard holding the number she'd read in his book, and the number was not enough. The regular land bank loan, Hollis explained to her the next day, and he could not meet her eyes while he did it. The regular loan was capped by law at a share of the appraised value. Half the value of the bare land, a fifth of the buildings. On the appraisal that man had carried back to Omaha, that share came to about $2,100. She owed $2,840. There was a hole in the middle of her rescue $700 wide, and $700 in Sable County in the fall of 1934 was the moon. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and the tin box open and Thomas's discharge paper in her hands, and for the first time since the day in the bank, she let herself feel the whole weight of the thing, all at once, in the dark, where the children couldn't see. $700. She turned it every way a mind can turn a number at 2 in the morning, and it came out the moon each time. Harlan Voss had been right on the steps. He had found the one wall she couldn't climb, and he had known it was there before she did. Then, a little after 3, she did the thing she always did when a row looked too long to hoe. She stopped looking at the whole row. She looked at the next foot of it. And the next foot of it was Hollis, and the young man had said, way back on that first day with the door shut, she was sure he had, that the land bank was not one thing, that it came in pieces. She was on his doorstep in Kearsley when he opened it in the morning. "You told me it came in pieces," she said. "You told me some of it was 1916, and a great deal of it was last year." "What's the last year piece, Mr. Hollis? Tell me the piece you haven't told me yet." And the young man, who had been up half the night himself over the same $700 because he was that kind of young man, broke into the slow, dangerous, delighted smile all over again. And he pulled her inside and sat her down and told her about the commissioner. There was a second loan, he said. It sat on top of the first one. When times got desperate enough last year, Washington had seen exactly this: good farms, honest debts, and appraisals too low in a bad year to cover them, and it had made a second kind of loan, a land bank commissioner loan. That could reach higher up the value of the place than the regular loan was allowed to, up to 3/4 of the whole worth of the farm, land and buildings together, at 5% instead of 4.5%. It was made for the gap. It was made for the $700. Stacked on the regular loan, the two of them together could reach past $2,840. They could cover the whole note, every dollar, and still leave her a yearly payment a working farm could carry. "Why," Della said slowly, "did you not tell me that at the start?" "Because I hoped the first loan alone would do it," Hollis said. "And a man doesn't hand a person a second debt before he knows they need it. But you need it. And it's yours to have, Mrs. Rourke, if the association will second it, and they will, because Otto Tandy would put his name to your paper with his own blood." He pulled the form toward him. "Read every line of this one, too. Then sign it, and let's go beat a banker." She read every line. She signed it. And then there was nothing to do but wait. Through November, while Omaha turned its slow federal wheels, and this was the strange, quiet, unbearable heart of it, the part Harlan Voss never saw. Because it happened inside a widow's house and not on any courthouse step. Voss believed she was scrambling to find a buyer. He believed she was writing letters to relatives, begging cousins in Omaha, chasing money that didn't exist. Running out her 90 days in a fool's hope. He believed it because it was what everyone before her had done. He drove past the Rourke place twice that month, slow, on the county road, looking, and both times he saw a woman and a boy bringing in a poor corn crop and putting up a poor winter's hay, looking for all the world like people getting a farm ready to hand over. And he could not see, because it was not a thing the eye could see, that every night after the children slept the woman sat at her kitchen table reading land bank bulletins by lamplight until she understood the machinery better than his own lawyer did. Once, in the middle of November, Calvin Pell came smiling up the lane again, not with a surveyor this time, but with a paper. An offer, a real one. From the Sable Land and Cattle Company, $400 over the note for a clean, quiet sale, no auction, no fuss, take it and go. $400 was moving money. $400 was a mean little fortune to a family with 40 in a coffee tin. Pell laid it on the porch rail and said it was the best she'd ever be offered, and it wouldn't stand past Friday. Della looked at the paper. Then she looked at Calvin Pell, and she thought of the red flag in her drawer, and she thought of Otto Tandy carrying her news kitchen to kitchen on foot, and she thought of Emil Brower turning his cap in his hands, "We don't let them take a soldier's ground." And she folded Pell's offer in half and handed it back to him unsigned. "Tell Mr. Voss I read it," she said. "Every line." "Good day, Mr. Pell." Pell's smile finally, fully died. "You're betting your children's roof on a government office in Omaha," he said, and there was nothing friendly left in it now. "That's a poor bet, Della. That's a fool's bet." "Maybe," Della said, "but it's mine to make, and I've made worse and lived." And she went inside and shut the door, and she leaned her back against it. And her heart was going like a threshing machine, because she had just handed back $400 real for a hope in an envelope somewhere between Kearsley and Omaha, and she stood there against the door until her hands were steady. And then she went and started supper, because the children had to eat, and because a woman who has just refused a fortune needs to keep the hands busy while the deciding finishes hardening into done. The letter from the Federal Land Bank of Omaha came on the 3rd day of December. She did not open it in the yard. She carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table and made the children sit down, Emmett 16 and grave, June 11 and swinging her feet gone still, and she opened it with the bread knife because her hands would not tear it straight. She read it once to herself, top to bottom, slow, the way she read everything now. Then she read it out loud to her children, and her voice only broke on the one word, and the word was approved. The loan was granted. The regular land bank loan and the commissioner loan together, enough to cover the whole of it, at 4.5% and 5%, over 33 years. In a yearly payment the poorest honest harvest could meet. The land bank would tender the money, would pay the Cattlemen's and Merchants Bank of Renwick the full $2,840, cash, in satisfaction of the note. And the day it did, the note would be marked paid, and there would be nothing left in the world for Harlan Voss to foreclose. The tendering was set for the second Saturday in December at the courthouse in Kearsley, the same wide front steps where the Tandy place had fallen in June, where Della's own auction notice still hung yellowing in the winter wind, where the whole county had come so many times to watch a hanging. Word of it went out the way all word went out, kitchen to kitchen. And this time the thing that traveled with it was a word the county had almost forgotten how to say. They came anyway, the way they always came. But they came different. It was cold that Saturday, a hard blue cold with the ground iron underfoot, and by 10 in the morning the courthouse steps and the square in front of them were full of farmers in their Sunday coats and their wives and their children, 31 families of the Sable County National Farm Loan Association, and a good many more besides. Come not to bid, come not to gawk, come to stand. Otto Tandy was there in his brother's borrowed overcoat. Emil Brower was there, straight as a fence post at 80. They did not push, and they did not shout. They simply filled the square, so that when Harlan Voss's clean automobile pulled up, he had to walk through them to reach the steps, through a silent country crowd that parted for him without a word and closed again behind him. And a man can feel a thing like that on the back of his neck, though not one soul lays a hand on him. The tendering itself took 4 minutes and was the plainest thing anyone ever watched. A field man from the Federal Land Bank of Omaha, in a gray suit, stood on the steps beside the county clerk. He read out the loan and the amount. He presented to Harlan Voss, president of the Cattlemen's and Merchants Bank of Renwick, a draft in the sum of $2,840. In full satisfaction of the note held against the Northwest Quarter in the name of Rourke. And he asked Mr. Voss, before the clerk and the witnesses, to accept payment and mark the note satisfied and release the bank's claim upon the deed. And there was the whole trap, sprung, in the open, in the cold, with the county watching, because a banker does not get to refuse to be paid. There is no clause in any note that lets a man say no, I would rather take the farm. The note said what was owed. The draft was for exactly that, to the dollar. Harlan Voss could rage, or he could smile. He could hate her to the roots of his soft hands. But he could not do the one thing he had come to Sable County to do. He had to take the money. He had to sign the note satisfied. He had to hand back the deed. He took the draft. His face was arranged, still into something like the regretful shape. But it did not fit right anymore. It hung on him wrong, the way a coat hangs on a man who has lost weight in a bad month. He signed where the clerk showed him. And when the clerk asked, for the record, whether the note was now satisfied in full, Harlan Voss said, "It is," in a voice with all the softness gone out of it. And the word went out over that silent crowd, and something moved through them. Not a cheer, these were not cheering people, but a long, slow breath let out together. 300 people exhaling at once in the hard blue cold, so you could see it rise up white over the square like something the whole county had been holding since June. Calvin Pell was there at the edge of the steps, and Della watched his face while it happened, because she wanted to see it, and she was not ashamed to want to. She watched him understand that the Tandy place, and the Lindqvist place, and every other quarter the Sable Land and Cattle Company had swept into its pocket had been bought on a bet. The bet that the drought would break and the land would rise, and a man who owned half the county cheap would be a rich man in the sun. And she watched him understand, standing on those cold steps, that the county had just found the one thing that broke the bet, a way for a farmer to hold on. Word of that draft would be in every kitchen by Sunday and in the next county by Wednesday. There would be no more cheap quarters. The sweeping was over. Calvin Pell put on his good gray hat and walked to his black car through the same crowd that had parted for Voss, and it parted for him too. Silent. And he did not look at anyone, and he drove away, and that was the last the square saw of the Sable Land and Cattle Company standing tall. Della Rourke did not gloat. She had promised Thomas's memory, somewhere back in October, that she would not. And she was a woman who kept a promise even to the dead. When it was over, she went up the steps to where the field man in the gray suit stood. And she thanked him, and she asked him quietly for one thing more, the note itself. The old note. Once it was marked paid, and the bank was done with it. It was hers now, satisfied. She was entitled. The clerk fetched it. And Della folded the paid note in half and put it in her coat pocket, next to a small red flag she had pulled up out of her own field on a cold October morning and carried. All this while, waiting for the use of it. The use of it came in the spring, and it came, as the young agent might have predicted, with a knock. Calvin Pell came up the lane in April with his hat already in his hands. The Sable Land and Cattle Company had a problem, and the problem was a small one and an old one, and entirely of the sort that only matters when your luck has turned. The road. The only decent way to reach the Tandy Quarter and the two beyond it that the company still held ran across the far northwest corner of the Rourke place, along an old dirt lane that Thomas Rourke had let his neighbors use for 30 years out of plain neighborliness and had never once thought to write down or charge for. It had never mattered, because it had always been given. Now it mattered, because the company needed to run cattle and haul hay across it, and the woman whose corner it crossed was no longer a woman about to lose her farm. She was a woman holding a paid deed, free and clear of everything but a kind federal loan, and the lane was hers to give or to keep. "We'd pay fair for a right-of-way," Pell said on the porch, turning his good gray hat. "Reasonable yearly rent. You name a fair figure, Mrs. Rourke, and we'll shake on it today." Della let him stand there a moment in the April sun. Then she said she'd think on a figure, and she named it, and it was not money. "The company will sell the Tandy place back to Auto Tandy," she said, "at the price it paid on the courthouse steps in June, not a dollar more, and it'll do the same for the Lindqvists if they want theirs, at what it paid. Do that, in writing, and you'll have your lane across my corner for $1 a year and my blessing, and your cattle can cross it till the crack of doom. Don't do it, and you'll haul your hay the long way round the section, 6 miles of bad road every load, from now until the company gives up and sells to somebody who will. That's my figure, Mr. Pell. It's the only one I've got. And it doesn't move." She smiled, not unkindly, the way you smile at a man who has finally been handed the arithmetic of hard times from the other side. "You'll want to take that back to Omaha and let them do the sums. 6 miles of bad road, every load, forever, against selling the Tandys their own place back at cost. I expect the sums'll come out the way sums do." The sums came out the way sums do. By June, a year, near to the day, from the morning she'd stood in the back of that crowd and watched Otto Tandy lose everything. Otto Tandy had his farm back, bought at the price it was stolen for, with a land bank loan of his own that the Sable County National Farm Loan Association had helped him get, and there was a lane across the far corner of the Rourke place, with cattle crossing it, and once a year the Sable Land and Cattle Company mailed Della Rourke a single $1, which she framed and hung in the kitchen where she could see it while she washed the dishes. Harlan Voss stayed on at the Cattlemen's and Merchants Bank another year, but the machine that had fed him was broken, and everyone in Sable County knew now the word that broke it, and they said the word to one another over coffee and at the elevator and after church, land bank. Land bank. The way you pass along the name of the medicine that cured the thing you were all dying of. No note in the county swelled up untouched anymore. When a man fell behind, his neighbors sat him down at a kitchen table and showed him the road before the interest ever closed over his head. There were no more June auctions on the courthouse steps. And a banker whose whole art had been the patient waiting for a debt to drown a man discovered that there is nothing so useless as a trap that everyone has learned to walk around. Voss sold out and went back to Omaha in the second year and was not much missed, and the one thing anyone remembered him saying, in the end, was the thing he'd said on the courthouse steps to a widow he thought had nowhere to turn, that there was no money left in this county, that there was only him. He had been wrong about both halves of it, and the being wrong had cost him everything. And that was the whole of the justice, and it was enough. A year on from the letter, on a fair evening in early summer with the light going long and gold across ground that had finally, that spring, seen rain, Della Rourke sat on her own porch on her own 160 acres and drank her coffee slow. The wheat was up and green and moving in the wind like water. The way it hadn't moved in 5 years. Out past the windbreak, Emmett was walking the fence line in the last of the light. A man's walk now, unhurried. A man walking his own family's ground, and June was on the step below her mother, humming, snapping the ends off a colander of green beans, and up on the little rise beyond the windbreak, where the graves were. The long grass caught the gold and held it. Della thought about the day in the bank office, so far back now it belonged to another woman, the soft folded hands, the 7 days, "You've no bank left in the world, sell to me or lose it for nothing." She had not cried then, and she did not cry now. She only sat with her coffee going cool in her hands and let the evening come down over the place. Over the wheat and the fence and the boy and the girl and the graves, all of it held, all of it hers, paid for in the plain coin of a plain life and one hard winter of reading every line. It was just land. It didn't know any of what it had cost, or how near it had come to being lost, or that a small red flag lay in a drawer inside the house, kept forever, to remember a morning by. It didn't know any of it. But it held all of it anyway, the work and the grief and the promise made in a west field to a man in the frozen ground. And the winter she had spent turning 7 days into 90, and 90 into a whole life, the land held all of it, the way land does, quietly, and gave back only the wheat moving green in the wind, and the long gold light, and enough.